On the 12th of April 1984, Parliament made it possible for the people of the United Kingdom to own British Telecom shares. That means not just big city investors, but everybody who wants to.
It was an ad campaign that worked. When the first state-owned industry was privatised 35 years ago, demand for BT shares vastly outstripped supply.
Good afternoon, British Telecom share information, please.
Marching into Lancaster today, though, Jeremy Corbyn said a vote for him is a vote to renationalise part of BT.
A Labour government will make broadband free for everybody. And not just any broadband, but the very fastest full-fibre broadband to every home in every part of our country for free.
Free and fast connectivity for everyone by 2030, buying back part of BT at a cost of £20 billion. Labour say broadband is now a necessity. Small businesses like this graphic designer in rural Somerset agree.
There would be signal from here to another satellite quite some distance away that would then go to another satellite quite some distance away, and then we'd eventually get a signal from somewhere over near Minehead. And so if one of those dishes or whatever it was, antennas moved, everything would stop, and then we'd have to phone people who would literally physically be climbing poles.
Getting the broadband here that some cities get as standard cost their landlord £40,000. To Jeremy Corbyn's offer of free internet, though, scepticism.
I feel from past experience anything that is free is generally not very good quality. So for us it's the speed and the quality of the broadband that actually matters. I can understand for homes with low-income families it would be really beneficial. I completely get that. For businesses I'm not sure it would work so well.
Good afternoon everybody. Hello.
Boris Johnson says he'll give the nation quick internet too, just not for free. And he had some choice words for Labour's plan.
We're funding a huge programme of investment in our roads, in telecoms, gigabit broadband, unlike the crazed communist scheme that was outlined earlier on today. We will give people gigabit broadband by 2025.
So scorn from the Conservatives, but today's announcement has done the rarest of things of late, given Boris Johnson and the Liberal Democrats something to agree on.
Well, it might be a Christmas election, but this is getting silly. Another day, another fantasy promise added to the Labour Party's wish list. Wasting billions of pounds on nationalising BT will not solve the problems of connectivity around broadband in this country.
Critics disagree with Labour about the potential cost of nationalising BT's broadband arm Openreach. It's a cost, analysts say, that far extends BT but goes to the wider market.
Investors always want stability. They want to know that if they put their money into something, they will get a reliable return and it won't suddenly be, whipped away from them. And that is effectively what Labour are saying. Any shareholders, and that's people through their pension funds, that's small shareholders as well as the big ones, you're saying to them, if you do this, we're going to undermine the value of your investments, your savings, your pension pot.
While we're all talking broadband, though, the focus is off Brexit. Tonight, Nigel Farage cancelled an event in Wolverhampton after a tricky week. On Monday, he gave the thumbs down to hundreds of Brexit Party candidates standing against Tories. Today, this programme has learned at least 8 angry former Brexit Party candidates are now standing as independents, saying Mr Farage is guilty of the one thing he so often accused the government of, letting voters down.
Inevitably, personality is featuring in this election along with politics. And a simple question on the BBC this morning seemed to stump Boris Johnson.
Why are you relatable to families up and down across the country? How can they relate to you and your family?
Well, I think that the best answer I can give is that of course I've been I've had a very happy and wonderful life in many ways. I was the beneficiary of my parents gave me fantastic opportunities, and they brought me up to be very.
Well, joining me now to discuss the character and relatability of party leaders are Gitto Harry, who was Boris Johnson's communications chief during part of his time as London mayor and an old friend, and Owen Jones, who's been an aide to senior Labour figures and is now an activist and journalist. Gitto Harry, why does a question like that stump Boris Johnson? Is it because he is deeply uncomfortable with his own privilege?
No, I think it's hard to answer that question about yourself. Why are you such a success story, Christian? That's a hard one for you to answer.
I could talk for hours on that if you like, but yeah, I mean...
But I can answer for him. You know, he's comfortable in his own skin. He's comfortable with who he is. That picture of the Bullingdon lot was shown to David Cameron one weekend and he squirmed. It was shown to Boris a weekend after on a live TV programme and was asked, are you ashamed of this? And Boris could say, without blinking, there are so many things in my life to be ashamed of. I'm not sure where that comes in the pecking order.
Why is he forgivable, though? Because, I mean, you worked for him, but then you kind of turned on him over some of his language and Brexit, and you wrote some pretty harsh stuff about him. But you all come back round.
I disagreed with him on Brexit, which is a policy disagreement, and there were a few things he did about a year ago that were deeply offensive, I thought, in terms of language. But he is a man who's comfortable in his own skin. He doesn't pretend to be something he's not. And when he walks down the street, and we've seen Gordon Brown couldn't do this, we saw Theresa May couldn't do this, but when Boris walks down the street, people's eyes light up. They turn to him. They feel they can call the Prime Minister by his first name. They feel that they can shout, as they did this week, where have you been? You took your time. He gets across that age of deference to something that is very, very modern, very contemporary, and also very timeless.
I mean, people say the same thing about Jeremy Corbyn walking down the street, don't they? But I mean, but in the opinion polls, you know, Boris Johnson's likeability seems to be higher. Does that bother you? Do you think it matters?
You've got to remember, last election, at the beginning, Theresa May was more popular than Tony Blair and Margaret Thatcher at their very zenith. She was extremely popular. I mean, they were running a presidential campaign. They airbrushed Conservative off the campaign buses. Boris Johnson's nowhere near as popular as May was at the beginning of the election. In terms of Jeremy Corbyn, yeah, I mean, again, we're back to where we were last time. I think the hope within Labour circles is that, because I think you're probably going to roll your eyes, but it is true that the vast majority of the press are vitriolically opposed to Jeremy Corbyn and effectively operate as campaigning
organisations. A lot of the press clearly are,
for the Conservative Party. But when broadcasting rules kick in an election, there's an opportunity for him to directly speak to the people. And we saw last time...
Oh, this is an old nonsense, though. I mean, we invite him on the telly all the time and he says no.
He doesn't like doing interviews. Boris has done hundreds and hundreds of interviews.
What I was trying to say, guys, is in the last election, the more he was on debates, the more people actually liked him. The more they saw him on television, because they thought he was authentic. Even his bitterest opponents would say about a man who never wanted to go in frontline politics and didn't spend 4 decades plotting about how he'd climb to the top like Boris Johnson has, that he genuinely cares about things like the housing crisis or poverty or unemployment or public services, austerity. That keeps him awake at night. And I think what Labour has to do in the debates is to get that sense of compassion and authenticity across in a way that contrasts with a man who I think most people would accept, a man sacked twice for lying, a man who has called black people pickaninnies with watermelon smiles, gay people bum boys, and compared,
don't do the whole list,
and compared Muslim women. But we can talk about that, you know, really nasty, vicious stuff, which you wouldn't say about Jeremy Corbyn.
I mean, today's broadband announcement, I mean, you know, the Conservatives are trying to ridicule it, but is that an indication that they're a bit rattled, do you think?
Well, I think it's an interesting one, because at one level it does seem insane to commit vast amounts of money to give to bankers to buy shares, rather than investing in something that is meaningful. That's the problem with nationalisation. But it's captured people's imagination. A lot of people feel that broadband is not good. Broadband is critical national infrastructure. But I think the main point is Boris has tried to frame this election as tightly and forensically as possible as a chance to get Brexit done. Almost anything that has us talking about things other than getting Brexit done is actually detracting from that and creating a sort of distraction and potentially a problem. More important even than that is this week you've got floods, you've got an NHS crisis, all of that, and we may even, which is nice on one level, stop talking about Brexit. And then it opens up to a much more interesting election.
It's breathtakingly bold, you know. I mean, it's unimaginable that past Labour leaders would have suggested something like this in terms of, you know, spending that kind of money and another nationalisation. I mean, just, you know, is that an indicator of where Labour is in this campaign? That just be more radical, go further than where the Tories are? And it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, the whole basis of, if you like, what you could call the Corbyn project is a belief, which is backed up by a lot of polling evidence, that the consensus established by Margaret Thatcher, that you roll back the state, that you let the market rip, is not something which actually the public buy into. They see that the railways are rip-off, inefficient and fragmented. They see that they get ripped off by their energy companies and their water bills. They saw a crash caused by the privately owned banks, which led to a massive squeeze in living standards. And if you look at Wi-Fi, I was trying to watch the broadband announcement. I couldn't because my broadband kept going down. And the fact is that our entire economy and society now, the infrastructure is based on the internet.
But people thought Ed Miliband was too left-wing, and now we've got this.
But if you look but in the last election, Labour didn't win, I'm sure you'll point that out, but they did deprive the Tories of a majority because when they had that manifesto, do you remember when it was leaked? It was splashed upon the front page of The Sun, The Times, saying back to the 70s, terrible stuff. But when people saw what they're going to nationalise the railways, they're going to increase taxes on the rich, they're going to scrap tuition fees, things which terrified past Labour politicians, but resonated with people who are fed up with what they see as a society which is very wealthy, but which is being held back in terms of its potential because it's rigged in favour of the rest of it.
When Labour isn't worried or embarrassed about being radically left-wing, that's much harder to take on.
It is to a certain extent, and the Conservatives have made quite wild, by traditional Conservative standards, spending commitments of their own, which in the past Labour would sort of appeal to your heart and say, wouldn't it be nice if we could splurge on this? And on balance, the Conservatives were more persuasive on telling people to think with their heads, not their hearts, and say, we can't afford it. But now the Conservatives are making massive spending commitments. The Lib Dems are making huge spending commitments. So if everybody's sloshing the cash, then we start to talk about, if you have money, which we probably don't, it's more about the values. Where would you then choose to sort of spend it? And that's, again, making this an interesting election. But it's interesting to see the Conservatives so committed to the NHS
but that's a danger.
and outmanoeuvring,
it's a danger for Labour.
Got to leave it there,
Labour on that.
But thank you both very much indeed. Gitta Harry, Owen Jones, thank you very much.